For more on this and the other top political stories of the day, Caitlin Huey-Burns and Natalie Andrews join me. Caitlin is CBS News political correspondent. Natalie, a congressional correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. Natalie, we know the dates now of the upcoming hearings. So what do we know about the focus of the next hearing for this committee?
We expect this hearing to focus on the groups that came to Washington and really answer some questions on how they got to Washington, what their purpose was, and start looking into maybe who these groups are, and I really introduce them to the watchers of this hearing. It's been interesting to watch the January 6th investigatory committee really tell a story and use these hearings to try to reach people. And this hearing will likely introduce those groups to viewers who may not be extensively familiar with the Proud Boys or Oath Keepers and how these groups work and how they communicate.
Yeah, there have been these fleeting references to these groups in the previous hearings. The next hearing will give us more than a fleeting reference to the far-right groups. The latest numbers from May show the current inflation rate now 8.6%. Consumer confidence and the Consumer Expectations Index have both fallen considerably, the latter being a measure of how buyers project the next 6 months are at their lowest level in roughly a decade. So, Caitlin, what is the White House saying now about the economic outlook across the country?
Well, Scott, the White House is in a position where they maintain that the economy looks good on paper. You have unemployment at a low rate, but people are not feeling it the way that it looks, and especially with the high inflation and gas prices, and especially as we're heading into summer travel months, people are really still feeling it. And so the big question is, what can this White House do to help alleviate that pain at the pump, but also to help bring inflation down? And one of the things that they've been kind of considering, and something that we're waiting to hear on, is whether they will ease up on some of the tariffs dealing with China that were implemented during the previous administration. And there is a kind of a divide in the White House and even among Democrats about how to deal with that. So the White House didn't have a lot to say about this today, but we know that the president is heading to Cleveland, Ohio tomorrow, where he is expected to talk about his economic agenda and to possibly address some of these issues. But you have a lot of Democrats, as you know very well, Scott, covering Capitol Hill, who are, at home on recess. They're getting these questions from constituents. And there's often a situation where the White House maintains that there's not a lot they can do, but that they're looking at options. And you have Democrats on Capitol Hill who are trying to, get reelected, and knowing that even though they're trying to tout a lot of these agenda items that they've been able to do, you have a lot of people wondering, well, how can you help address prices? And even though we have all of these other issues going on, the economy still ranks as a top priority for voters, of course. So this is something that we're going to be looking for an answer from the White House, how they're exactly addressing these kinds of issues.
All the while, the president's approval rating is dropping. A new Monmouth University poll shows it's down double digits from last year, now at 36%. Natalie, should we expect to see President Biden campaigning with that type of approval rating?
Not all. It's certainly fair to say that a lot of Democrats don't necessarily want to be on the same stage as President Biden as they fight to win re-election. Some do, and I think we'll see him map out a path that is friendly to him. Whether President Biden likes it or not, he's very aware that midterm elections in the first term are really a referendum on the president, and members of Congress are having to address that. I know when I've talked to lawmakers, they are doing polling kind of behind the scenes to see how their own approval rating in their district tracks with President Biden's numbers, both in their district and nationally. And as Caitlin said, people are really frustrated. They're feeling that pain. So even as President Biden talks about voters making decisions in terms of voters picking Democrats so that maybe they will prioritize gun legislation or legislation on abortion rights. Often when it comes down to what matters most to voters, it's the economy, it's the prices. And right now, people are holding President Biden accountable for that. And Democrats are worried that will hurt them in the midterms.
Hey, Caitlin, in the meantime, the president seems closer to ending some or all of the tariffs and the economic sanctions on China. What's the potential significance of this for consumers, and where does this move stand?
Yeah, and the White House press secretary was asked about that today and didn't have anything to say in terms of the timing, although that is a big question of, we know that the president has been entertaining the idea of ending these tariffs, which were implemented by the Trump administration. But there's a really interesting kind of political divide within the Democratic Party and within the administration about how to move forward. On one hand, you have some who say that easing these tariffs will allow for some of those costs to come down here. But then you also have this question of whether that gives up U.S. leverage when it comes to negotiating with China. It was interesting to hear from people like Tim Ryan, who represents a district in Ohio, who, of course, is running for Senate. He is very much opposed to ending these tariffs because he thinks that this would disadvantage the American worker, which is, behind the reason that they were kind of put in place in the first place, or among them. So you have an interesting political divide here, but we're waiting to see if and when this administration decides to move forward with it, and what exactly would be transferred on to the consumer, how exactly this would bring prices down for Americans, because that's kind of the bottom line here. Is every time you go to the store, every time you're paying for basic things, they're more expensive. So not only making this decision if they do, but also explaining kind of directly how this will impact everyday Americans.
It's hard to move voters off these consumer issues at this moment in time. Natalie, the White House has been trying to get congressional buy-in to a gas tax holiday to try to salvage the issue of gas prices. What's the likelihood anyone in Congress goes along with a gas tax holiday at the federal level?
The idea of doing a gas tax holiday has really fallen with a thud at Capitol Hill. That's just no better way to describe it. It seems to not be getting really momentum from the key Democrats you would need to push something forward, like House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. It's interesting that the White House chose to continue pressing this, even though they don't have buy-in from top Democrats. And you're not seeing a large swath of congressional leaders calling for this. So it doesn't look like it will go anywhere. We do know that it does look like gas prices may be turning a corner. Maybe we'll see some lower prices in a few weeks. But as for right now, I wouldn't expect the gas tax holiday to move forward when Congress returns next week.
Didn't have any early success. It's not having any midterm moderate success now either. Caitlin, I want to make some time for Brittney Griner. Wrote a letter to President Biden on the 4th of July. What's been the reaction to her continued captivity where you're standing there at the White House?
Yeah, Scott, and we heard from Brittney Griner's wife on CBS Mornings earlier today, and she expressed frustration that she has not heard from Biden or the White House about how they will get her out of detention. And you kind of sense this desperation on her part and on the part of Brittney Griner herself. This is something Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, was asked about this today, and she said that Biden read that letter that Brittney Griner sent, but the question remains about what they are actually going to do about it. I actually asked her about this in the press briefing. Let's take a listen.
Griner's coach said if this was LeBron, she would be home, right? It's a statement about the value of women. It's a statement about a black person, a statement about the value of a gay person. All of those things we know is true. Do you see this as a double standard?
This is a president who has put all of the things that you just laid out, the LGBTQ community, women, people of color. He has fought for those communities throughout his career, and you have seen that in policies that he has put forward. Again, this is a priority for this president. He's doing everything that he can.
So Griner has been in detention, of course, for months, and that statement from her coach essentially saying that, look, if this were LeBron James, if this were someone else, would more have been done quicker? And I also asked the White House press secretary, if this is such a priority for the president, why has it taken to the point that, Griner is writing to him from detention, essentially from jail, asking for something to be done, and her wife, making those pleas as well. And so they said that this is a priority. They mentioned, they would approach this the way that they had with Trevor Reed, for example. So there are questions about what this might look like. The NSC has really taken the lead on this and say that they are working to get her release. But this does raise an open question about what exactly this would look like, especially since it has been months, and what kind of arrangement it would take to bring her home. But a very compelling interview from her wife on CBS Mornings earlier today, and you could really just sense that desperation that they're in.
All in all, a very busy start to the week. Caitlin Huey-Burns, Natalie Andrews, thank you both.
Thank you.